Shaking hands, I watched the security camera feed. As my fiancé walked into my house with my coworker, they thought I was at a conference in New York. They didn't know I'd cancelled the trip and forwarded the camera to my laptop. I felt my pulse in my teeth as the camera app pinged. Motion detected, foyer. They thought I was in New York for a 3-day conference. They didn't know I'd cancelled that flight and forwarded the feed to my laptop sitting on the breakfast bar. My name isn't important yet. What matters is that in Boston, on March 5, 2024, at 12:41 p.m., I watched the man I'd been planning to marry walk into my own house with my coworker and laugh like the place already belonged to him. I'm 31. My name is Lena Morell, and I live in Jamaica Plain, about a 10-minute walk from Arnold Arboretum. I lead quality assurance for a medical device software company in Cambridge. My days are precise: 6:15 run, 7 down shower, 7:15 pour over coffee, weighed to 22 grams, 8:05 orange line if the trains behave. My one quirky passion is urban beekeeping. On my tiny back deck I keep 2 Langstroth hives registered with the city, both numbered, both with tidy notebooks of inspections. The bees calm me because everything with them is honest. They either work or they don't. They don't ask you to pretend. Ryan Keating wasn't a pretender when I met him. He was 33, an industrial designer with a neat portfolio of bicycle accessories and an apologetic smile for the gaps in his teeth. He loved the way my hives hummed at dusk. He learned my bees by sound, he said, like learning a language. The first red flag should have been that he always turned his phone face down at dinner. He said screens ruined conversation. I believed him. It took me a year to decode that as, I'm hiding people. The second flag was a dream, a fitness wearable startup called VeroStride he swore would change physical therapy. He had mock-ups of an ankle cuff, an app, and a swagger that drew people into his gravity. His timeline slipped like wet rope though. Rent money timed to next investor call. Product delays blamed on a flaky firmware guy in Berlin. I found my own voice getting rehearsed. It's a cash flow blip, I began telling myself when I covered December and then January rent for the studio he'd outgrown in Southend. We got engaged in early 2024. It wasn't grand. He cooked me pasta with anchovies, poured Syrah, and in our tiny kitchen by the window with the ficus, he said he'd realized love wasn't fireworks, it was instruments tuning together. I don't know if he cribbed that from somewhere. The ring was modest but pretty, a Montana sapphire set in a rose gold band that made my fingers look longer. My parents in Providence were thrilled. My sister in Chicago texted me a row of honeybee emojis. VeroStride had a moment in February. He presented at a small angel pitch night in Kendall Square. I sat in the back with a notepad, scribbling things like baseline gait metrics, per patient dashboard, and FDA Class 2 pathways. He deferred the regulatory part with the confidence of a man who has not read 21 CFR but knows how to charm. People clapped after a wealthy woman in a teal blazer gave him a card and said she managed a syndicate that liked biosensors. He was euphoric. We ended the night at Clover eating rosemary fries and making promises. He kept saying, we are going to do this. We are going to hire a real firmware person. We are going to need a bigger place. Bigger place became my house. I bought it 2 years earlier, a 2-bedroom at 19 Boylston Terrace, a little grey shingle with a stubborn lilac bush and a back deck for the hives. I had a 2.65% mortgage that felt like winning a game show. I told him we could turn the second bedroom into an office temporarily until his seed round closed. He moved in a rack of black t-shirts, a 3D printer, and a toolbox that always looked more posed than used. Then the money talk shifted. He wanted me to be his angel. It's just bridge capital, he said. 25 to keep the devs on. My salary plus a bonus from a successful 510K submission meant I had the cushion. He framed it as us investing in our future. He got specific, 5% equity in VeroStride in exchange for a $25,000 safe at a 1.5M cap. He learned the words like lines in a play. I asked for a written agreement. He blinked and said, of course. He sent a safe. It was generic, no valuation cap, no discount, no true investor-friendly terms. My father's facial expression in my head went stony. I revised it. I added a 20% discount, the 1.5 million cap, and a clause requiring unanimous consent for transferring any IP outside the company. He signed. I wired $25,000 on February 9th at 10:09 a.m. to VeroStride LLC. Bank of America, checking ending 9817. I screenshot the confirmation and saved it in a folder called VS Funding Receipts. I also noticed a small thing. He picked up my mail more often than before and stacked it neatly on the hall table. He also stopped asking me questions about my day. I could tell he was listening less because he stopped interrupting. It sounds backward, but the man who interrupts you cares enough to disagree. The man who lets you talk without lifting his eyes from his laptop is memorizing nothing. The coworker, Tessa Park, was new to our company, a UX researcher with straight bangs and a quiet laugh. She invited me to a Thursday trivia once and told me she loved weird hobbies. I told her about the bees and the ritual of inspecting for queen cells. She came over on a Saturday to see. We stood in veils and smoked the hive, and I waxed on about propolis like a fool. She took a picture of me holding a frame heavy with capped honey. "You look like a priest with a gold Bible," she said. I loved that line. I didn't know then it would be the picture I used later in court to prove she knew where I lived. I started to sense something wrong when I found a square of peach knit under the couch. It wasn't mine. Ryan said it was a cleaning cloth that came with a lens kit. 2 days later, my Nectar app logged a rare movement alert from the back door while I was at work. He said he'd popped home to grab a spare USB-C cable. I told myself this was life, messy and fine. The conference that saved me was in New York, March 5-7. Our regulatory team wanted someone from QA to sit in on a panel about software as a medical device. I booked at 8:15 a.m. Amtrak, Hotel Beacon for 2 nights, per diem, logged in, concur. The night of March 4th, Ryan massaged my shoulders and said he'd miss me like oxygen. I left a honey jar on the counter with a note to please water the ficus and frost the hives if a cold snap hit. At 5:50 a.m. March 5th, I stepped into the pre-dawn, rolled my suitcase to the end of the street, and stood there a minute. The air smelled metallic like the snow that never fell. The feeling in my stomach, which I had labeled conference nerves, had another name. I walked back into the house. I cancelled my train. I emailed my manager that I'd attend the sessions virtually. Then I made 2 changes. I toggled my smart lock to require physical keys instead of auto unlock on phone proximity, and I moved the Nest camera feed to a brand new Gmail labeled Honeycomb. I put my suitcase back in the closet and made tea. At 12:41 p.m., the foyer camera pinged. Ryan pushed open the door with his hip and held it for Tessa. She wore the peach knit. He kissed her in my hallway. He said, laughing, "It's clearer when I see it here." She said, "It's so, domestic." They walked past my bees framed in the kitchen window. Tessa looked and said, "She's going to turn this into a metaphor, you know." Ryan said, "I'm tired of metaphors." They went into the bedroom. Shock isn't white noise, it's a gear grind. I stood very still and felt the awful coolness of having no questions left. I didn't cry, I went methodical. I screen-recorded the feed, time-stamped it with an overlay. I pulled up the safe and the wire receipt. I made an appointment online at 1:30 p.m. with an attorney named Sofia Delgado at a firm on State Street for a consult regarding investment fraud and tenancy issues. I booked a second consult with a family law attorney for 4 p.m. I texted my neighbor, a retired chemistry teacher named Bruce at 21 Boylston, to ask if I could store 2 totes in his garage for a few days in case I needed space. He said sure and added a sad bee emoji. They were still upstairs at 1:05 when I gathered Ryan's 3D printer and toolbox into the entryway. My hands shook, but I kept going. I set his rack of t-shirts by the door. I placed his running shoes on top. I opened his laptop and took photos of his calendar entries, including a recurring block called TPUX Review, set Fridays at 2 Agatsan. I emailed myself copies of any documents labeled VeroStride that had my name. One was a spreadsheet called CapTable Darshan V3, where El Morel was listed as safe, undiscounted. He hadn't even updated it. He had written my $25,000 in a column titled Friends Family Gift. I took a photo with my phone, checked the date, last modified February 28th, and muttered a phrase I'd never used aloud: breach of contract. At 1:12, I heard the soft tread of feet on the stairs. I had moved to the kitchen. I stood with my laptop open to a spreadsheet labeled Inspection Log, Hive A, Hive B. I looked at my notes so I wouldn't look at them. They walked in. She saw me first. She made a sound like a small balloon, letting out air. He said, "Lena." I don't know what I expected to feel. I felt almost nothing. I asked him to set his key on the counter. He said we should talk. I said, "I have talked. For months." Tessa's hand was shaking. She said she was sorry, then she looked at the camera in the corner and closed her mouth. Ryan tried a new voice, reasonable investor Ryan. He said the safe money was already deployed to contractors. He said I didn't understand startup cash burns. He said I didn't own the house alone, not practically. I asked him to read the deed. I asked him to set the key down again. He smiled the way men smile when they're cornered and want the floorboards to finish the job for them. He said, "You can't evict me. I'm a resident." I said, "I am not evicting you. I am asking my fiancé to leave my house after watching him cheat on me in my bedroom." Tessa whispered, "We should go." He looked at her like she'd broken rank. Then he set the key down. When the door closed behind them, I exhaled and called Sophia's office and said I was coming now. I took the train into downtown with my laptop and a folder labeled VeroStride. On the 9th floor, Sophia listened without interrupting. She used a fountain pen. She said words like conversion, misrepresentation, and civil standby. She asked me for the documents. I slid the safe, the cap table screenshot, the wire receipt, and the screen recording of the foyer feed across the table. She nodded and said we had leverage. She said we would send a demand letter for rescission or conversion of the safe into outstanding company assets, and that we would, in parallel, file a small claims for the maximum allowed in Massachusetts if needed for a portion, and pursue the rest in civil court, but first we'd test them with a demand. She liked the unanimous IP transfer clause I'd insisted on. "He signed this?" she asked. I nodded. "Good," she said. "This is your B suit." At 3:20 p.m., she emailed a demand letter to info.verostride.com and ryank.verostride.com from her firm domain. It referenced Section 3b of the safe and the misclassification on cap table.over 3. We gave him 5 business days to cure by either returning funds or formalizing the safe on the updated terms. We also demanded he vacate the property by March 8th at noon and return all keys. If not, we'd seek a restraining order related to harassment and trespass, based on the break of trust and the security footage. Sophia had me file a police incident report that evening at E13 in Jamaica Plain, not as a guarantee of action, but as a timestamp. The officer, a young man with tired eyes, wrote domestic dispute and no physical violence reported. It still mattered. I asked for the case number and took a picture. At 4 p.m., I sat with the family attorney, a woman named Naomi who had a way of making every cup of water feel like a stable thing. She told me I did not need to file for any separation because there was no marriage. What I needed was boundaries. She suggested a civil standby, an officer present when Ryan came to collect his things so no one could claim theft. She also suggested a formal notice revoking any informal tenancy. She printed one. I signed it. I slept that night at my parents' house in Providence with my phone on silent. The next day, a cascade began. Ryan sent 13 texts between 7:32 a.m. and 10:10 a.m. They started reasonable and ended with blame. He said he loved me. He said Tessa was a mistake and also a misunderstood connection. He said I was cold. He said I was making him homeless. He said the safe terms were unfair given his valuation. He said he would move out by Saturday. He said he would not sign anything. He said Vero Stride was bigger than us. He said if I loved him, I'd never hurt his company. I did not answer any of them. I saved them as PDFs, labeled by date. At noon, Sophia forwarded me his first lawyer's response. A man from a small firm in Waltham wrote that Ryan disputed the characterization but was open to discussing a modification of terms. My heart knocked around. They were conceding the original safe was flawed. Sophia drafted a reply. Until the vacate occurred and I had an equipment inventory from the office, I would not discuss any IP or funds. She included a draft inventory template with serial numbers and photographs. The 3D printer's serial was 4C7-201. I only knew because I had taken the photo. Every time I saw a photo, I remember my hands not shaking while I took it. The body knows the law sometimes before the mind does. Friday at 10 a.m., 2 officers met us on the sidewalk outside my house. The older one, Officer Dwyer, had been on 5 such standbys that month. "We're here to keep the peace, not arbitrate property," he said. Ryan arrived at 10:06 with a U-Haul and a face I didn't recognize. Tessa was not with him. He looked at me and something pleading moved across his face, but this wasn't a negotiation. We gave him 2 hours. He took the printer, the T-shirts, a duffel of cables, his tools. He asked for the Le Creuset. I said it was mine. He asked for the ficus. I said no. He said, "You can't keep me from my life." The officer cleared his throat. When he left at 11:52, he didn't turn back. By Monday, he'd switched tactics. He emailed my boss, Kelsey, at 9:01 a.m. and CC'd our CTO. He wrote that due to an unfortunate personal matter, he needed me to return any proprietary material I'd taken from his company, including shared files. He implied I'd copied code. He was trying to get me fired. I forwarded the email to Sophia and to HR, attaching the original demand letter. I wrote 2 sentences. I do not have any Vero Stride materials other than the safe and a cap table screenshot that mentions me. HR thanked me for raising it and said they'd watch for retaliation. Kelsey called me and swore for the first time in 3 years. "Do you want to file for a restraining order today?" she asked. I said yes. That afternoon, with Naomi, I filed in West Roxbury District Court for a 209A protection order based on harassment and intimidation. We took with us the screen recording of the cheating, the texts, the email to my boss, the police incident report, and the demand letter. The judge read quietly and asked me what I wanted exactly. I said I wanted him not to contact me except through counsel and not to come within 100 yards of my home or place of work. She granted a temporary order pending a full hearing in 10 days. The papers were served at an address in Somerville he'd moved to, an Airbnb he was calling home. The week got uglier. Tessa emailed me a long apology that was really a script about autonomy and misread signals. She said Ryan told her we were effectively over and that he lived at the house but was phasing out. She said she saw now that wasn't true. She said she'd never meant to hurt me. She ended with, "Please don't ruin my career." I did not respond. I forwarded it to HR with one line. This person knew my address and used it for a personal meeting with my fiancé during work hours. HR did their HR thing. They put Tessa on leave pending investigation for a week. People whispered. I didn't say a word. I went to the hives after work and pulled a frame. Both colonies were healthy. I wrote in the log that Hive B felt calm and note-taking again grounded me. That night I swapped my locks to physical keys only and set my floodlights to high sensitivity. I started a folder called Security. I printed 2 copies of everything. I put one set at my parents' house and a set in my office file drawer. On Friday, an email landed from the Teal Blazer Angel Syndicate. We were forwarded your attorney's letter. We're sorry for what you're going through. My mouth went dry. Someone somewhere was talking. The angel asked for a call to understand governance concerns. Sophia dialed in with me. We explained the safe, the misclassification, the cheating as context for harassment. The angel was crisp. She said she'd pulled out of 3 deals in 10 years due to founder chaos. She asked if there were any IP assignments. We said we had Clause 4 in the safe, requiring unanimous consent for IP transfer. She said, so he can't sell the code to an acquirer tomorrow. Sophia said not without violating the agreement. The angel paused. Then we're out, she said. We wish you well, Lena. On March 14th, the court hearing began at 9:30 a.m. He came with the Waltham lawyer. Tessa did not appear. The judge asked questions about the photos, the texts, the email to my boss. I answered plainly. I told her about the lock changes and the policing. Ryan spoke in that reasonable cadence that had swayed rooms before. He said my bees were a metaphor for my control issues. He said I'd weaponized the law to punish him for a consensual affair. The judge raised an eyebrow. Naomi said softly, this is about safety and about harassment following a termination of relationship. The emails to her employer are retaliatory. The judge granted a 1-year order, no contact, no proximity to my home or my workplace, including not contacting my neighbors about me. She was specific, 100 yards, 365 days, with the option to renew. Immediately after, Sophia emailed his lawyer with a curt subject. Next steps, safe cure or conversion. The lawyer tried to bargain. He offered to return $10,000 now and the rest when we close seed. Sophia sent back a draft complaint ready to file, breach of contract, unjust enrichment and conversion. She CC'd a partner with a reputation for cleanly dismantling small frauds. He blinked. On March 20th, a check for $25,000 arrived by certified mail in an envelope with his lawyer's return address. The memo line read, safe rescission. I deposited it at my branch on Center Street, took a photo of the teller receipt with the timestamp 11:14 a.m., and emailed it to Sophia with a subject that felt like balm. Funds received. The weirdest part of Aftermath is the quiet. When Ryan's noise fell away, the house changed shape. I moved his emptied rack of shirts out of the second bedroom, repainted the wall a color called sea salt, and assembled a proper beekeeping station with labeled boxes and a stainless uncapping knife I'd eyed for months and never bought because someone always needed something first. I slept. I started to taste food again. The escalation came anyway. On April 3rd at 7:02 p.m., my motion camera caught a man in a baseball cap standing on the sidewalk across from my house, staring for 3 minutes. He never approached the door, he just watched. The image was grainy, but the slouch was Ryan's. I emailed it to Officer Dwyer with the order number. He responded within an hour. They'd swing by his Somerville listing and remind him what 100 yards looks like. I also printed the image and added it to security. He pivoted to text through burner apps. First, an unknown number saying, I'm sorry for everything. Then, we can fix this. Then, please tell the judge I'm not a danger. Then one dark thing, if you keep the angels from me, there will be nothing left to love about you. I forwarded each to Sophia and reported the numbers. She sent a demand through his counsel to stop all indirect communication or face a motion to extend the order with new evidence. The burner text stopped. 2 weeks later, I met someone who smelled like cedar and asked me patient questions. Not a date. A locksmith named Marco, who came to install a reinforced strike plate and a keyed Gilgen on the back door. He noticed my veils hanging on a hook. He told me his mother kept bees in Lucca, Italy, where he grew up, and that he used to stir the honey with a wooden spoon and lick his fingers until his nonna smacked his wrist. He laughed when he said it. He asked if the bees made me feel brave or careful. I said both. He nodded like that made perfect sense. I didn't make anything of it. I just noticed he looked at my hives the way I do when I'm listening for the Queen. Tessa left the company. HR said nothing publicly. People whispered. A month later I heard she'd moved to Denver. I didn't pull on the thread. Pulling kept me in a story that wasn't mine anymore. I put my energy into a small grant I applied for through a state pollinator program to install a community hive behind a library in Roslindale. I got it. The check was $2,000. I bought cedar boxes and a new veil, and I wrote in a notebook that something good can be built even after rot. In June, I got an email from an unfamiliar address, a woman named Amelia from the Tealblazer Angel Syndicate. She said they'd passed on Vero Stride, but they were intrigued by the way I'd enforced the safe and protected IP. She asked if I'd consider consulting with their portfolio on QA processes for regulated software. We like people who understand discipline without cruelty, she wrote. I said yes. The first startup was in Providence, which meant an excuse to eat my father's terrible grilled zucchini and sit on the porch with my mother as mosquitoes chewed our ankles. The work felt like a song I knew by heart. Summer settled into a rhythm. Hive A swarmed once, just a small cloud, and I coaxed them into a box with a branch and a prayer. Marco stopped by one Saturday to check the hinge alignment, which was obviously an excuse, and I made him coffee and we sat on the back steps, watching bees bring home pollen like they were proud of their shopping. He told me he'd been a carpenter in Lucca, not a locksmith, and that his brother still makes tables so heavy you need to be certain before you put them down because they do not move. I like the idea of heavy certain things. The twist came in August, like heat lightning on a day that shouldn't have storms. A woman knocked on my door. She was tall, 60 maybe, in a linen dress, and she had a face that could scold an ocean. "Are you Lena Morell?" she asked. I said yes. She handed me an envelope. "I'm Ryan's mother," she said. "He didn't send me. I came because I'm tired." Inside the envelope was a birth certificate copy, a list of addresses, and a one-page letter in blue ink, with loops like a schoolteacher. She wrote that Ryan wasn't Ryan Keating. He was born Ryan Kincaid. He'd changed his last name when he moved to Massachusetts at 24. "He can be charming," she wrote. "When he believes he is owed something, he becomes a different person." She listed 3 women from his 20s and a man in Providence whom he'd borrowed from. She said she was sorry. She said she'd been so grateful when she thought he'd finally found someone steady, and then so angry when she realized he'd simply found someone steady to put on his boat while he cut the rope. She ended with, "You know how bees choose a new queen? They feed her differently. I wish I had fed him differently, but here we are." I sat on the porch with her while the afternoon turned buttery. She told me stories that weren't mine to share. She asked to see the hives. I put a veil on her and we walked out. She watched a forager land heavy, legs fat with gold. "They're beautiful," she said. "They are," I said. She asked me if I hated her son. I told her that hate is a tether, and I had cut mine. When she left, I called Sophia and asked if a name change mattered to anything. Sophia said not directly. Fraud is fraud, regardless of last names. But I sent her the letter anyway. She sent back a single sentence: "I'm glad you're free." The last time I saw Ryan was not in person. It was a video someone texted me in late September, a TikTok where he pitched Vero Stride at a small demo day in a shared office in Somerville. The logo was the same, the app screens were the same. He spoke with that gravely authority, like a man explaining wind to trees. Comments were kind. No one knew he'd funded a romantic afternoon by misclassifying an investor or tried to get me fired when I wouldn't let him move in my house with a woman who'd admired my bees. I watched the clip twice. I felt nothing. Then I closed the app and went outside. The hives were loud and golden. Marco was in the kitchen, humming off-key and fixing the stupid cabinet door that always sagged in summer. I packed a small jar of honey in a paper bag, wrote "For Bruce" on it, and walked it next door to the man who had stored my totes without asking questions. He opened the door in socks and said, "Is this for me or for the tea?" "For you," I said, "for being my neighbor." He said, "That's what we're supposed to do." And he smiled in a way that wasn't a pitch for anything. It was just a smile. You want a neat ending, a revenge arc, a courtroom cheer. The neat ending is this: I recovered my money. I kept my house. I kept my bees. I got consulting work because I enforced a contract like a person whose labor mattered. I met someone who asks if the bees need water on hot days. And on October 2nd, when I flipped through my inspection log and wrote that Hive Bee's queen was laying strong, I realized I hadn't thought of Ryan in 72 hours. He said, months earlier, that he'd forget me in a week. But I'm the one who forgot him.